Once upon a time, in a land where the winters stretched longer than the summers, a cursed mirror shattered into countless shards. The mirror, forged by dark forces, twisted all that it reflected, turning beauty into hideousness, kindness into cruelty. The shards scattered across the world, embedding themselves in unsuspecting souls. Among them was a boy named Kai, who lived in a quiet village with his best friend, Gerda. Kai and Gerda had been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets and laughter beneath the golden rays of summer. But as the first frost of winter crept across the village, something within Kai began to change. A shard of the cursed mirror had pierced his heart, filling it with coldness, and lodged itself in his eye, warping his view of the world. The warmth that once defined him gave way to cruel words and a distant gaze that Gerda could not understand. One day, drawn by the icy allure of the Snow Queen, Kai disappeared without a trace. Gerda, desperate to find him, set off on a perilous journey, braving enchanted forests, raging rivers, and creatures born of nightmares. Her love for Kai was her only guide, a fragile thread that kept her from succumbing to despair. At last, Gerda reached the Snow Queen's palace, a towering fortress of ice that shimmered with an otherworldly light. Inside, she found Kai seated upon a frozen throne, his face pale and emotionless. The shards of the cursed mirror gleamed in his eyes, reflecting a cold and twisted version of the boy she had loved. "Kai," Gerda whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me. I've come to bring you home." Kai's gaze flickered toward her, but there was no recognition in his eyes. "Home," he said, his voice distant and hollow. "This is my home now." Before Gerda could respond, the Snow Queen appeared, her presence commanding and terrifying. She was a vision of cold beauty, her eyes glinting with an icy light that pierced through Gerda's very soul. "So," the Snow Queen said, her voice as smooth and chilling as the wind outside, "you've come all this way for him. How touching." "Release him," Gerda pleaded. "Please, he doesn't belong here." The Snow Queen tilted her head, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "And what will you offer me in return? Love? Sacrifice? Words?" She leaned closer, her breath frosting the air. "The boy's soul is not so easily freed." Desperation clawed at Gerda's heart. "I'll do anything," she said. "Just let him go." The Snow Queen's smile widened. "Very well. Solve my riddle, and he is yours. Fail, and you both remain here forever." A frozen puzzle lay before Gerda, its jagged shards reflecting distorted images of her memories with Kai. The pieces seemed impossible to fit together, but Gerda worked tirelessly, her fingers bleeding from the biting cold. All the while, Kai watched her with a vacant expression, as if he were no more than a spectre. As Gerda's tears fell onto the shards, they began to glow faintly, melting the ice around them. Piece by piece, she completed the puzzle until it formed the image of a blooming rose, a symbol of the summers they once shared. The light from the rose bathed the room in a warm glow, and for a moment, it seemed as though Gerda had won. Kai's eyes flickered, the cursed shards trembling within them. "Gerda," he whispered, his voice fragile and uncertain. But before he could take her hand, the Snow Queen intervened. "Ah, but love alone is not enough," she said, her voice laced with mockery. With a wave of her hand, the rose shattered, its light extinguished. "You see, child, the curse is not so easily undone. To free him, you must take his place." Gerda's heart broke at the sight of Kai's tortured expression. She stepped forward, her resolve unwavering. If that's what it takes, then so be it. The Snow Queen's laughter echoed through the palace as her icy magic enveloped Gerda. She gasped as the frost crept up her legs, seeping into her skin and draining her warmth. Kai cried out, his voice breaking, but he was powerless to stop it. As the ice claimed her, Gerda managed one final whisper. "Live for me, Kai. Remember me." For a moment, the ice in Kai's heart began to crack, faint tendrils of warmth reaching out from within. But then the shards of the cursed mirror embedded in his soul pulsed violently, radiating a dark energy that pushed Gerda back. Kai's scream echoed through the palace, a terrible sound that made the very walls tremble. His body convulsed, the cursed ice spreading anew through his veins. He turned to Gerda, his face twisted in agony, and in his eyes she saw something horrifying. Not love, not sorrow, but rage. "Why did you come here?" Kai hissed, his voice no longer his own. "You've ruined everything." Gerda froze, her heart sinking. "Kai, it's me. I came to save you." "You didn't save me," he spat. "You've only made it worse. I was at peace. I was happy." The Snow Queen stood silently, watching the scene unfold with an expression of cold amusement. "You see, child," she said softly, "love cannot always mend what is broken. Sometimes it only deepens the cracks." Gerda shook her head, desperation clawing at her chest. "No, that's not true. I know you, Kai. I know what's in your heart." But Kai's expression was unrecognizable now, his features hardening like frozen stone. "You don't know me," he said. "You only know who I used to be." The shards of the cursed mirror flared again, and Kai's body began to dissolve into snow. Gerda reached for him, but her hands passed through him as if he were already gone. "Kai!" she screamed. But he only stared at her, his expression cold and unreadable. "Leave, Gerda," he whispered, his voice distant, "before it takes you too." And then he was gone, his form scattering into 1,000 snowflakes that whirled around her in a mocking dance. Gerda fell to her knees, clutching at the air where Kai had been. Her sobs echoed through the icy hall, but the Snow Queen's voice cut through them like a blade. "You made your choice, child," she said. "Now it's time to pay the price." The frost that had crept up Gerda's arms earlier surged forward, wrapping around her chest and throat. She gasped, clawing at the ice as it seeped into her skin, her warmth draining away with every breath. Her memories began to slip through her fingers. The sound of Kai's laughter, the feeling of summer sun on her face, the scent of flowers blooming in the spring. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't forget. I won't." The Snow Queen knelt beside her, placing a cold hand on her cheek. "You already are," she said, her tone almost gentle. "Let it go, Gerda. Let yourself become something stronger, something eternal." Gerda's tears froze as they fell, shattering against the floor. Her last thought before the ice claimed her was of Kai's face. Not the boy she had loved, but the one he had become. And the cruel truth that she had failed to save him. When Gerda opened her eyes, she was no longer the girl who had set out on her journey. Her reflection stared back at her from the icy walls of the palace. Her hair now white as frost, her eyes as cold and unfeeling as the Snow Queen's. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her voice was gone, stolen by the icy winds that now whispered her name. She wandered the halls of the palace, her memories fragmented and distant, like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to her. In the mirror shards, she saw the faces of others who had come before her. Children, lovers, friends, all of them lost to the Snow Queen's curse. Outside, the frozen world remained silent. The villagers who once whispered of the Snow Queen now spoke of her successor, a new queen whose beauty was as haunting as her sorrow. Travelers who ventured into the icy wastelands claimed to see her wandering the frozen plains, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something or someone. But no one ever returned from the palace. Far away, in the village where Gerda and Kai had once played, the seasons stopped changing. Winter reigned eternal, and the people began to forget the warmth of the sun. And in the heart of the Snow Queen's palace, Gerda sat upon a throne of ice, her hands clutching a shard of the cursed mirror. In its fractured surface, she saw Kai's face, frozen in the moment he disappeared. She stared at it for hours, days, years. Time no longer mattered here. And as the snow fell endlessly outside, the palace whispered with the voices of those it had claimed. Among them, one voice rose above the others, faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Gerda!" She turned toward the sound, her frozen heart stirring. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure in the distance, walking through the snow. But when she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the echo of her name and the unrelenting silence of the ice. The new Snow Queen remained, her throne eternal, her sorrow unending. And the cursed shards of the mirror glimmered in the frozen light, waiting for their next victim. Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.